All right, we are back to Esther. We are up to chapter 6 now, but just a quick recap before we get into it because it has been a while. Just a reminder that what we started with in the first 2 chapters is the overall have to introduce that book, as we had a situation in which the king was kind of pushed as a result of an interaction as he's preparing to go to war to dethrone the queen, because somehow it'll save face and for all the men there. So he does that. He goes off to war, comes back. Now we got a problem. We don't have a queen. I'd like a queen. So we have the beauty pageant. Esther is the one selected, and there is noted that Mordecai has trained her and has told her, don't tell your lineage. Don't let them know. We find out, and this is pertinent for today's lesson, that right after this, Mordecai discovers a plot, overhears a plot against the king, relays that information on through Esther, and that they are then punished as a result. Then we get into chapter 3, where the antagonist, Haman, comes on the scene, and he has been elevated up high, but he does not like the fact he wants everyone bowing down and honoring him. Mordecai doesn't do that on the basis of being a Jew. So what does Haman do? He takes that to the king. The king says there's this people, notice vague. I want to point this out here in this chapter. Vague, a people. No, doesn't get into any specifics. That are they're against everything. They're against you, king, and they don't bow down. They don't respect your authority. And what he really means is him. And so we need to take care of them. They agree. So he says, here you go, signet ring, go with it. So Haman writes it out, and everyone's confused about what's happening because now we've got a promised genocide against the Jews at the end of that year. So that leads us to chapter 4, where in response to this, we find Mordecai steps outside from that court. He goes outside to mourn. Esther notes this, sends down word, and they had this back and forth about, wait a minute, what's the deal? Change your clothes. You know, everything needs to go back. And he informs her of what's happened. After a little bit of back and forth, then she accepts, yes, there is a responsibility. She has to do something. She's going to go to the king, and that they need to fast because of that. And so that's what we'll do. So here she goes, and she goes to the king. So that brings us to chapter 5, where she then goes to the king. Notice that is resolved quickly, we pointed out, and that he's accepted, even though the possibility could have been death. But she does this in a cycle. She says, rather than immediately telling him what the question is, she invites him and Haman to a banquet. They come that same day. She prepares all of this. She's dressed up in the royal garb. She's basically reminding the king of who she is and how much he likes her, and she's preparing all of this, buttering him up. Haman thinks everything's good, and the king says, okay, what do you want? And she says, let's do this again tomorrow. All right, now, she's wanting to set this up. I want you to look at this through her eyes as a plan, because that's what we found at the end of chapter 4. She was spending those days figuring out how to approach this. What you see play out is, at the first part, is here's how it plays out. And she decided she needed to do this in stages. First, to make sure she could even have an audience with the king. Second of all, to kind of, after that first one, the nice thing is everything you notice, the guard is down now. You now, having done that once, Haman's not going to be on guard the second time, and we're going to be moving forward. And I don't know, and we're never told, what would she have done if the king had said, no, tell me now. We don't know. Okay? But I think it shows she knew him. We've been learning about this king as we've gone through, and about how to persuade him. And that we found that the key element in this is he is highly influenceable, if I can use that term. All right? And so she is making the most of that. So, all right, go away. And what do we find at the end of chapter 5? Haman goes home, but on his way he sees Mordecai, and he's reminded that he, despite being second essentially in the kingdom, being a very wealthy man, being highly respected and has everything you could ever want, has nothing because there's Mordecai not bowing down before him. So he gets the advice, and this is really important to remember as we get into chapter 6. The advice is from his friends and his wife. This is an easy thing. Just set up a gallows, go to the king tomorrow, and request to kill Mordecai. Simple enough, right? And everything will be great. This is their advice. Okay? Now, that's really important as we move into chapter 6, because this is in the middle of this book where it's a complete turning, it's a shift of dramatic proportions. And it's intentionally so. This is the chapter. Because what do we have? We have a banquet with the king and Esther on one side, the promise of the next one, but something's going to happen in between. Okay? And everything changes based upon this. And the events that happen here are what make all this. All right, now, here we're going to go, and I want you to see how this lays out. And we're only going through verse 13 because I think that's where the story goes best. The first 5 verses are exposition. That is, all the things that have to be true to explain what happens and what follows. So this is the setup, if you will, of what's going to happen in this chapter. The rising action is, okay, well, if that's going to happen, where's the tension build up? It's a very fast tension. And then how does everything turn out in the climax is verses 10 and 11. Then what happens after that? And that's going to be really important for Haman. And then the response in the denouement is verse 13, where we return to yet another pronouncement from the wife and friends. Okay, that's where you get those key connections going on. So let's turn our attention to this now. You have the ruler who is out of touch. Now we're going to see, though, that Mordecai returns as the hero based upon what he did that we saw in chapter 2. Okay, so we already saw him as the hero there. He returns as the hero in this part of the story, and Haman is going to be the jester or the fool because of how things turn out. So with that, let's take a look at our text here today. In the exposition, we'll look at verses 1 through 5. So remember, he's had the banquet. Now it's the next day is going to be the banquet. So what happens in between? That night, the king could not sleep. So one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king, and it was found written that Mordecai had told to Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" This is just one more example of how he's like he would have bought, if he had gone through Walmart line, he would have bought everything on every candy bar, he would have bought everything, okay? Just the moment he's with it, that's who this is. Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to suggest that the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he prepared for him, referring to the story of chapter 5. The king's servant said to him, "Haman is there standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." All of this is set up now to get Haman's coming back. He's supposed to be back. He's coming back early, though, not for the banquet, but to try to get Mordecai killed. So that's why he's there. Now, what you have as you walk through this, you just got to put the differences and the contrast of what the expectations versus the outcomes against all of this. Okay? That is it's part of the genius of how this is written. Okay? To say, here's where we're going with it, here's all the expectations, here's what the movement is for, and now instead you get this. So that's a good way to kind of outline as you go through and look at it. So if you just kind of summarize this, the king has insomnia. Now, I'm going to point out as we go, we've been looking at different things that just happen in the book that had to be there. You had to have something happen to the first queen for Esther to ever be selected. So that had to happen first. But Esther also had to be selected. You had to have the events that would put Mordecai in the face. That was brought up in chapter 2. In order to in any way have a chance to address the problem that Haman presents in chapter 3. You have to have the relationship that's addressed in chapter 4 of Mordecai and that back and forth in those characters. You have to have the acceptance in chapter 5. But now we get in between, and the first thing we find is the king has insomnia. Now, I don't know about you. Have anybody here suffer from insomnia? Yeah? Yeah. So grab a good book, or grab a really dull book. Now, there aren't very many books that he's not going to be able to read, any good fiction. So why not read about, we're just going to read about, notice, it's got to be his reign for that, not to get to that part. So maybe his dad, maybe we start with his dad, and we're going to go through. But he's trying to cure his insomnia. Now, do you have any idea what causes insomnia at any particular time? Here's the night that has just got there. I'm trying to point out that here is something that is naturally, these kind of things all are regular, normal events. A problem that comes up with the queen. How you bring in a harem and you select somebody else. Abuse of authority by a government official. There's nothing unusual about any of these things. And there's nothing unusual about insomnia. It is what I'm wanting you to notice is, as this is put through the book, the use and recognition of all these different things at the right time that is key. It's this night that he has insomnia, and he is reading, and that brings him to this passage. So the chroniclers read to him. That's their job. Now, they were probably having a good night's sleep, but it didn't matter. Go get them up so they can read to me. So they read about Mordecai's exposure of the conspiracy that we saw in chapter 2. And then the king asks a question. What's been done to honor him? Now, whose failure was this? That Mordecai had not been honored. You think it was Haman's fault? Or the king could have. Haman wasn't on the scene yet that we know of. But you think that intervened? But I mean, the king could have honored him earlier, right? If he was informed. He was distracted. So again, we don't know the reason, but when you look at the nature of all of this, it's kind of like, oh, now I have time to stop and think about it. This is not a very reflective man, I don't think. But now he's forced to. Hey, wait a minute. Anything been done for him? He's finally feeling gratitude for it. So was there something that kept him from feeling gratitude or appreciation before? Somewhat. We don't know what. So now, okay, wait a minute. I'm feeling gratitude that he did this. So what do we do for this? And then, now verses 4 and 5. We need input. I don't know. What do you do for someone in this situation? Well, I'm going to get some advice. Now, remember what we've seen as a theme, one of the themes throughout? Giving advice, right? He's going to get advice. So he got advice on what to do for the situation of Vashti. He got advice on what to do to get a new queen. He got advice from Haman in chapter 3. You see advice being given from Mordecai to Esther in chapter 4. And in chapter 5, it's really about whether or not he's going to listen to Esther and the advice. Okay, so all of that is thematic. So what do we learn? He doesn't know himself. He's always just getting input and usually following through with whatever that input is. Very impulsive kind of behaviors, right? So that's what we see here. All right, so we've got Haman's there. Bring Haman up. He'll have some ideas. So there we are. Now let's have this conversation. He's just entered. Haman, remember, has on the mind, talk to the king about killing Mordecai. Right? That's what's on his mind. He's on a mission. Well, here's what happens. So Haman came in, and the king asked him, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Oh, wow. And here we go. Now, Haman thought in his heart. What do we have? What did I tell you about Haman? Is he a classic narcissist or not, or what? All right? Now, Haman thought in his heart, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Wow, I see to say, what can I? This is a man who is so self-obsessed that he can't think that anybody else would deserve honor from the king except him. He's the only one. And Haman answered the king. And now I want you to pay attention to what he has done, because this really tells you about Haman. For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on its head. Then let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honor. Then parade him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. What is Haman trying to accomplish here? That is right. I do not think that there is any doubt when you read this well about what he is doing is, this is an ambitious man who thinks that there is no limit to what he thinks he deserves. He has worked his way up, I think connived his way up, maybe at this point, be correct, but where he is just next to the king, what can he do to elevate himself more? Here's my opportunity. I need to look like a king. If you're really going to be honored, because he's already received all this other, what do you get for the man who has everything? Well, apparently, this. So, he needs to be viewed in kingly apparel, in a kingly procession, in wearing a kingly robe, drawn by a kingly horse, okay? All the things that are the king's, only it's him. So the only thing essentially would be replaced, that would be different than the king going on parade, is the person himself. That's the only difference. So he's wanting complete royal honors. Now, at this point, I want us to stop and think about how dense this king is. Because we see this, we're reading this, but the king doesn't. Why does he not get it here? Okay, yes, we know. Or you're reading ahead. Okay. Yes, we do know the end of the story, and that's always a challenge for us in anything biblical, because we know the end of the story. It really gets us in to be very judgmental about people because we know the end that they don't know. Okay. the king is not thinking of Haman. He doesn't have a good read on Haman. He's not good at reading people, but he doesn't have a good read on Haman. But he's not thinking about this for Haman anyway. So for him, he has not connected those dots. Wow, you're really generous, Haman, at giving away all my stuff. But that's one of the things, that's not his strength. So what have we actually witnessed then? So, okay, what's the best way, Haman, to honor someone? Just poses the question, could have been anything. Give him a nice house, give him some money out of the treasury, make a proclamation. But the key element of this rising action as this is building up is that part about he assumed the king was talking about him. That's a really important part of the rising action. What makes the difference in what's going to happen is that assumption. So then he recommends this royal parade based upon that. All right, so that brings us to the climax. How does all this turn out? What is going to happen? Remember, what we have in terms of in a literary way is you've got a confusion going on the part of Haman, which is important. This is what we're seeing here is in a little bit in chapter 5 and now really in chapter 6, he has looked completely just invulnerable. Chapter 3, he seems invulnerable. Chapter 4, the presentation of the fear of what could happen, the situation seems impossible. Chapter 5, maybe there's hope. And now, chapter 6, what we're seeing as everything's about to flip is, he just walked her in and stepped on a rake on this one. Okay. Verses 10 and 11. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robe and the horse, as you have suggested. I love that part of it. And do so for Mordecai, notice here, the Jew, who sits within the king's gate. He's right out there. There's nothing preventing all this from happening. Okay, you're right here. Here's the robe. Go get a horse. There's Mordecai the Jew. Let it be so. So, it's interesting that it doesn't tell us what Haman was thinking. You're left to kind of gather that from his behavior to this point. We're going to get to that in a moment. So Haman took the robe and the horse, arrayed Mordecai. It was his job to put everything on him. Right? He's having to clothe him, put the robe on him, get him taken care of, and led him on horseback through the city square. Okay, now this is, remember, this is in Shushan or Susa. So we're going to go now, and it's not like this is a big, huge parade, but in the most important area of where all the most important people are, that's where it would have been, in the city square, and parades him around on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So, the beauty of this in a literary way is Haman had an instance here in which the king once more followed his advice to the letter. Does everyone catch that? He follows the advice. Absolutely. He just got the guy wrong. So the king listens to him, but because of his own arrogance and not appreciating the situation for what it is, it's all flipped. So now, rather than someone leading him, which was his plan, through the city square and being proclaimed how wonderful he is, he has to do that. The roles are reversed. That's what this is. This is a role reversal. The roles are reversed. Now he has to do the leading for the person he hates more than anyone in the world. This is what makes this part of it so important for us to appreciate the story. How many different things had to happen? It's God reacting in terms of what he's doing. You have the insomnia, what would be read, knowing who the king is, knowing who Haman is. And all of these things are coming together, and you end up with all of this flipped. And now Mordecai is honored. And because of who Haman is, Haman's humiliated. Can we all recognize that's what happened? He is completely humiliated. No one has done a thing wrong to him. Now there's actually a life lesson in this. No one has done a thing wrong to him at all. But he feels complete humiliation because of the circumstances, of misjudging the circumstances based upon his own arrogance and narcissism. Pride goes before a fall. This is all of that worked in. Yes?
So do we think that the king still had no concept of what he had ruled about for the Jews? I know the king then had sealed it for the king.
No, that's coming up. He does not appreciate that yet. Because she said that, so the king at this point still doesn't know all that Haman has done and set up. No, that hasn't dawned on. This is someone who signs something, puts something out there, probably barely reads it, kind of like y'all do when you hit I agree on your computer. Okay? Now you're getting the picture. Okay, it's not that important.
Up with the same thing. This king has approved Haman's plan
Yes.
to annihilate the Jews, but it was such a minor process for him. He doesn't even recognize when he said, "Do so to Mordecai the Jew."
That's right. And the question, when you go back at chapter 3, for example, it says the letters were sent out in the king's name. Remember to recognize at what point was the king now out of the picture. Haman's controlled the wording. You see, you could very easily in chapter 3 have a decree go out in the king's name under the king's signature that he hasn't even read because he trusts Haman. Now, we're not for sure, but the way it reads, you cannot conclude that he even was aware of the particular group. Now, it seems hard to me that you could have something of that importance that everyone's talking about by the end, but you're also talking about a sense of isolation in the palace. Who's going to come up and say, "King, everyone's talking about what a dumb thing you just did"? Who's doing that one? No, you don't say those kind of things in a totalitarian society. That's right. You don't do those kind of things. That's right. So there. I mean, there's one thing is there's some ambiguity. We don't have all we don't know all the internals specifically about it. But when I'm basing my evaluation that he does not know based upon what's going to come up next, on his reaction to it, that hasn't clicked with him. Now, again. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer right here we're talking about. So I really wonder what historians would think of the way I'm characterizing Xerxes here, but I think it's legitimate. Okay? And I think you see some hints of that in other things in history too. I don't think that Esther is standing out here somewhere away off about their evaluation of Xerxes.
Could have told the king that Mordecai was one of that group when he told him to honor, but
He didn't.
it kind of makes me think he knew.
Oh yeah, he knew that would be the bad thing. Right, that's right. And also remember about the way in which, now this was not a decree, but remember the way in which Persian system, once it's come from the king, that's it. So there's not any argument once it's reached that point. Even if, as we note, they're contradictory. And that actually is an interesting point for how the solution is going to work out in the end, since we're all jumping ahead. But that's going to be part of this, is how do you solve something when something, you made a dumb decision? How do you resolve it? Okay. So here you go. Go out there, resolve all this, take care of it, Haman, to honor Mordecai. So, as David pointed out, so he does so. And again, the key is he did for Mordecai what he wanted for himself. That's the role reversal key there. It's the setup of what we know that Haman doesn't know. Then what we find about that, we learn about Haman that the king doesn't know. And now we see that reversed in the climax. All of that comes to a head. All right. So what as a result of this? So they've made their tour. You ever wonder what Mordecai, this is nice. If I'm Mordecai, I'm thinking this is nice, but kind of over the top. Right? So what do you get in verse 12? Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate. He just went about to doing what he'd been doing before. He'd been picked up at the king's gate, taken out from the king. Now, okay, go back to the king's gate. But Haman hurried to his house. That's correct. We got to work in our pouting time. Mourning, and probably pouting is a good thing, and with his head covered. He is ashamed. Here's the idea of humiliation. He is both, you just got to think about how distraught he would be going from where he thought he was to the embarrassment internally. Remember, who knows how much he hates Mordecai? Do people know? A lot of those people who would have seen would have known, because that was, remember, the original point in chapter 3? That what about Mordecai? Remember, there were people that understood. And they would have been in that particular circle. So he's just been embarrassed publicly, and so he goes off to his house. Again, he's upset, he's pouting, he's embarrassed. But there's a problem, though. What's the problem? He has another appointment, doesn't he? Yes, he does. And it's with the king again. And now think about this from his point of view. How exactly, the other thing that is key on role reversal here, he was there while the king is planning this out for, thinking about early on, so it would have been, early morning, for what to do with Mordecai to honor him. You've got this same thing going on, that Haman's walking into the palace in order to have him killed. That's the other thing that is juxtaposed here. So all of this is that, so he's now going back home. He can't. Just think about it. What would it mean, like, okay, I did that. By the way, king, could I get Mordecai killed? All right, timing. This is where it goes back to the timing of what happened in the exposition originally about the king couldn't sleep, and here's what he read, or had read to him. Because it totally brought something up in his mind and reminded him about who Mordecai is as a person that he probably wouldn't have thought about otherwise before, and then Haman comes in. So just think about what those circumstances had to be for Haman to come in. And now, what are you going to do? So Mordecai just returns to his post, and Haman is depressed, embarrassed, pouting. He goes back home. Now, in chapter 5, he had gone back home after the banquet. And this is, by the way, on this situation, you have a decision made without a banquet. Did you notice that? This is a situation where you don't have a banquet. And it's the one place in the book that everything turns on. So it is isolated by the lack of banquet and therefore highlighted.
Handle things more.
Yes. If we were putting a moral kind of thing on it, yes, that is juxtaposed here too. Mordecai has just been honored. He just goes back to doing what he's doing. Haman gets an opportunity, and he wants to see how close to being king he can get. Yes. All right, so here's the denouement in verse 13. Yes.
What do you think about the words of Haman's wife?
Well, that's what we're looking at. In verse 13.
Well, pardon me.
You're about to find out. Thanks for playing the game. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, so now we're getting the next part. His wise men, okay, that's a technical term. Okay, they can read the signs and figure out the books. And his wife Zeresh said to him, so this is the same group that in chapter 5 had recommended setting up the gallows and going to the king. Same group. That was their advice just the previous evening, right? 24 hours have not passed that they had solved all his problems by go to the king and have Mordecai killed. Problem solved, right? So now, again, probably, we're talking most likely, 12, 15 hours later? Here's what they come up with. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, that's a key element again in the literary term here of this is the real role reversal. Before whom you have begun to fall, if he is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. I want you to imagine having these kind of people giving advice in government. That they can flip around depending upon what happens and the advice be completely opposite of what they did before. Not that that's ever happened before. Happens a lot. So when you look at all this, he says, the evaluation, all they're doing is kind of evaluate what they see. And what do they see? There's nothing you can do now. There's no way you can follow through on the plan. They recognize that. So it's kind of like, sorry, too late. But the things, number one, begun to fall. Okay, things have changed. That's the first thing. This situation has changed. Two, if he's of Jewish descent, they're recognizing at this point, okay, we're messing with something here that we didn't have any business messing with. Now, they are doing it based upon Jewish descent. Now, that is, I think, a reflection, inspired reflection, okay, of what we find. So it happened. But from the point of view of Esther, that's really important because that's the whole question of the book. What's going to happen to Jews? And it's because of your descent. This is your attachment all the way back to Abraham and the promises made to him. Why would you protect? Why would there be confidence? Remember we talked about in chapter 4 of how can Mordecai be confident? It's because God protected his people. And so what Mordecai was saying in a way out of faith based upon those promises, what you have here at the turning point is a very subtle acknowledgement of that from the other point of view. But it's put in here and recorded by inspiration in Esther right here at this point for their point of view that, yes, this is intentional. You will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. You're not going to win this battle. You picked the wrong fight, my friend. That's essentially the end of this. So you go back, you report to the same friends, your wife, everyone, and again, now tells him you cannot win. Before, you went from the night before, this is a slam dunk. Easy one. And the next morning, there's no way you can win. Because of what happened in between times. What happened? It wasn't like there's this huge kind of battle that goes on. It wasn't a situation of they got some kind of revelation. It was a series of circumstances, all dependent upon the king's insomnia. And you don't know why on a given night maybe that's going to be a particular problem for you. There are reasons why, medical reasons and just all sorts of things why that could be the case. Bad supper. But you have that, the choice to read a result, but also what ended up being read. And therefore that had to have already have happened. And then the timing with Haman coming back. Notice what had to happen with Haman coming back. That was no control over that, because that was based upon Haman determined to do evil. He had a totally different plan, which ought to remind us of Genesis 50 and Joseph's statement about his brothers. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Okay? So I just want to take this opportunity in the middle of the book to note the nature of providence. And we'll do a review at the end, but I think there's so much here, and it's a good time in the middle to address this, that here are all these factors that turn on a completely normal kind of thing. But it was the series set up and the timing of it. Why not do it earlier? Because this king needs everything kind of right in his face to make that happen. All right. Again, I will be gone next week. We get back, we'll look at the end. We'll begin with verse 16 of chapter 6 and then chapter 7.